the transition away from fossil fuels is incredibly hopeful. It's really positive, and it leads to a world that is really nice to live in. So when you look at the scenarios of, kind of a decarbonized future, it's quite possible to have a thriving, healthy economy and human population powered by clean energy, not staring into the teeth of, unabated climate change. The world looks pretty darn good. You deal with a lot of ancillary pollution issues in that transition. You end up dealing with a lot of fundamental challenges that we have with energy supply. You end up with more domestic energy production as opposed to dependence on foreign sources of energy that are heavily subject, of course, to geopolitics and price fluctuations. So anyway, I could go on and on about that point, but the nature of the clean kind of net zero future is that it actually looks pretty awesome to be a citizen on planet Earth.
Welcome to Brands for a Better World, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the people and products building a more just, healthy, and regenerative future for us all. Tune in weekly, and together, we'll learn about why these better products and brands were created, how they're helping fix broken systems, and what you can do to support them. My hope is that you'll discover some new brands to love and get some sparks of inspiration that will help you live your best life. Hi, I'm your host, Gage Mitchell, founder of Modern Species, a sustainable brand design agency helping better brands grow to scale their impact. If you like this show, please help it grow by leaving ratings and reviews on your podcast app and by sharing your favorite episodes with your friends. Maybe this will be one of them. This episode is part of a 2023 Impact-Driven Gift Guide series, where we're digging deeper into some of the impact certifications we chose to feature in this year's guide, so you have a better understanding of what they each mean and how they're helping make the world better. To get your copy of the gift guide, go to modernspecies.com/gift guide. This episode's guest is Austin Whitman, CEO of the Change Climate Project, and we talk about what it means to be climate neutral certified, why climate change is such an important issue for us all to rally around, what they and certified brands are doing to address the challenge, and what you could do to help. We then wrap up with a fun gift-themed rapid-fire question segment. Enjoy.
Well, hi, my name is Austin Whitman, and I'm CEO and co-founder of a nonprofit recently renamed the Change Climate Project. We launched about 5 years ago as Climate Neutral, and we launched at that time with a consumer-facing label for carbon neutrality, which is called Climate Neutral Certified. We continue to provide that label, and you'll see it on a lot of consumer brands. But in addition, we are providing a bunch of other services that help companies accelerate on the path to net zero. So that's kind of a bit about what we're up to, and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me. I'm excited to have you on the show, partly because, as I think more and more people know how important all this climate stuff is, and I see the climate neutral logo out there a lot these days. So being kind of one of the more prominent players in the space, I'm excited for you to pop in here and share a little bit more about what that climate neutral certification that people are seeing on products is, or on companies, is all about. But also just because climate's so important for so many things, like all the systems that we work within, food systems or economic systems, they're all tied together, right? So same thing with climate. It's tied in together with social justice. It's tied in with the economy. It's tied in with health and wellness, and it's tied in with health, or I already said health, tied in with sustainability, so on and so forth. So it's such an important topic because it's tied to everything. So I'm excited to break it down a little bit for people and hopefully point some more people your way. With that said, since we don't know exactly how much the listeners will know about climate neutral, let's start with the basics. What exactly is the climate neutral certification, and what do businesses have to do to get certified?
Yeah, well, that's a great place to start. And I will kind of take us back about 5 years ago when we as myself, two co-founders, when the organization was just getting off the ground, the main kind of idea behind behind what we're doing was that the world is sort of full of eco labels that people have come to learn and appreciate and recognize, and things like USDA organic, FSC certified, non-GMO project certified, things like that. And all the same, there was no label, certainly in the US market. There are a few over in Europe that were very country specific, but there was no label that really spoke directly to the carbon emissions of companies and their products. And so we felt like there was a huge gap at a time when consumers, according to all the research and certainly all the anecdotal conversations that we have with people, consumers care more than they ever have because they're aware of the climate crisis. A lot of them are experiencing it day to day, and they feel a little bit powerless to do anything about it because it's such a big challenge. It takes a lot of work to understand it, to anticipate sort of how you're going to be affected, and certainly a massive amount of work and expertise really to understand how different individuals, companies, states, non-state entities, kind of contribute proportionally to the problem. So we are here to try to make it feel a little bit less scary, a little bit more hopeful, to create a little bit more agency and optimism around responding to the climate crisis. And certainly don't want to paint a rosy picture of where things are headed, because we're realists, but also at the same time we have to take on the problem in an optimistic way. Otherwise, it's very hard to get out of bed in the morning. So we that's a little bit of kind of why we launched the label. But what it basically means is that a company that has been through the certification process has first set out to create a carbon inventory, which is essentially taking stock of what parts of your business are creating emissions and where and why. And that carbon inventory covers upstream emissions, which is all the emissions in your supply chain. So think of kind of the raw materials through the various factories, through the finished goods, through the distribution of products to warehouses, and then out eventually to customers. Plus all the overhead business operations, things like the offices that your company works in, the services that you depend on, legal services, design services, computer services, servers, that kind of thing. So we first require companies to take stock of all their emissions. Then we require them to identify plans to reduce those emissions. This is something that every company really needs to be thinking about these days. And there are more immediate ways to reduce your emissions, like switching to clean energy. And there are more complex, longer-term ways to reduce emissions, like engaging with your suppliers and starting to think about how to squeeze carbon emissions out of your supply chain. So that's really the second step that we require. And it's important, I think, to note that all this happens annually for the certification, because we recognize that this is all just a journey. And you're not going to have all the answers in year one and say, hey, I'm certified for life. But, you do it once, you do it again the next year and the next year and the next year. And every time it's a little bit different. You're a little bit further along in the process and the journey, and you know a little bit more. And it gets easier. The third step that we require, and this is really the kind of the mechanism for accountability that we have, which is we don't just want to know how much carbon is in your product, but we want to know what you're doing about it. So what you're setting out to do as far as reducing your emissions is that second step. And the third step is also important, which is what investments are you making in carbon credits, in renewable energy certificates, to clean up the emissions that you're creating every year. In other words, it's kind of the technical term is the unabated emissions, the emissions that you haven't yet been able to reduce. And so that's the third step. And the magic of that third step is that it actually creates what's called a carbon price for companies, which means that every company is now aware of a dollar amount for every ton of their carbon emissions. So if I have 10,000 tons of carbon emissions and I'm paying $10 or $15 per ton for carbon credits, I am now basically bearing a carbon price, which creates great opportunity for me as a sustainability leader in a company to find ways to invest in reductions because there's now a price on carbon. So that kind of mechanism we found to be really helpful in creating an incentive for companies to focus on emissions.
Yeah, so that's all great and super clear, I think, in terms of letting people know that it's about, taking that inventory of where all your carbon is being spent or emitted, identifying plans to reduce anything you possibly can, and then offsetting through investments to kind of clean up the emissions that you're not able to reduce. That all makes sense. One thing that I thought was interesting is you said it also helps companies then understand their carbon price for like the cost of these emissions. How is that carbon price calculated or set?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. We essentially, by requiring companies to compensate for all of their historical emissions, they have a carbon price that is set based on the price of the carbon credits that they're buying. So we don't set that price. The price is set by the market in the voluntary carbon space, voluntary carbon market. And that market price is tied to a variety of things, the type of projects that they end up choosing to support, the supply and demand at any given time, the various verifications and third-party assurances that are applied to carbon credits. There's a whole bunch of different factors that go into market pricing, but essentially that's a market-based price that would be set. And in the last 4 years or so, we've seen prices pretty steadily hovering between, call it $6 and $15 a ton, which is a reasonably wide range, but it kind of gives people a sense of what kind of price we're talking about.
Yeah. And part of the reason I was asking too is it sounds like it's calculated more on like the cost of actually doing the work out there with these projects to offset or to reduce impacts or whatever of our human civilization by whether it's planting trees or whatever else. But I'd be also interested to see how that number compares to the cost to the planet and society of actually emitting the emissions, right? Because the cleanup is one cost, but like there's maybe some other stuff that we're not calculating into the cost of actually operating the way we do in the first place. Yeah, I don't know if there's any numbers out there that you've seen or some research that you've pulled to show like this is the actual cost per ton of carbon on the planet, like when we emit it. Like I just saw a post on LinkedIn, I think, about the unseen costs of the broken food system, that how it ties to healthcare or social justice or poverty or like all these other kind of things. So it'd be interesting to see like the untold cost of carbon, like not just the cost of what it'll take for us to invest to kind of reverse some of this climate change that we're creating, but what's the cost of doing it in the first place?
Yeah, and the economists would say that's the social cost of carbon. It's the cost to society of every ton of carbon emissions. Like any economic modeling, there's a lot of complexity to how you arrive at something that is, cross sector, cross society, in many cases cross the world, and boil it all down to a single number. And what we have right now in the U.S. is around $55 per ton. So what the federal government regards as the social cost of carbon. I believe that there are some folks who argue that cost is actually closer to $200 a ton.
Oh my gosh!
In the last presidential administration, the federal government reduced it to somewhere in the order of $1 or $2 per ton for political reasons. So there's kind of the underlying economics and science baked in with, of course, politics, and the result is some number that is determined both by economists and set by governments. And it's used as a reference point by some institutions, some entities, but it's definitely not reflective of the abatement cost or the mitigation cost. It's reflective of the cost of the damages. So into
Right.
that number go all sorts of things: effects on human health, effects on, weather patterns that will lead to more severe storms and cause multi-billions of dollars of damage every time a hurricane hits Florida, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So those factors are all baked into that one number.
Stuff. Maybe we're focused on the wrong stuff. What if we could do better with the stuff we buy? Support businesses that do the right thing for the planet, create less waste, rebuild ecosystems, and protect the land and its natural resources. Give gifts that are more thoughtful and more thoughtfully made, promoting safe working conditions, fair wages, and diverse communities. Good business exists if you know where to look. Don't give the wrong stuff this holiday season. Give the good stuff. With the Impact-Driven Gift Guide, we've made giving good easy.
Beyond the things you mentioned, I also imagine is somehow tied to like species loss and other things like that, where we're kind of losing animals at a unprecedented rate, right? So it's like there's so much that goes into it that we're not thinking of. So I do love that, it's about measuring and reducing wherever you can, and then having a price to pay to kind of invest in rebuilding. But I also love that there is actually work out there and studies being done to show what the true cost of the damage is, just because that's the true number that we should be working towards. Like, I'm all about progress over perfection. So like, let's get people started. Let's invest in these things and let's make it accessible to do so. But eventually, I don't know if it's 2030 or 2050 or whatever, at some point, that price of any leftover emission should probably match more of the true cost of $55 or $200 a ton or something like that. That would be my vote. And, that's speaking, I'm a small business. So like if I was a large business, I'd probably be advocating against that because we would be able to afford to. But like, that's the real number we could be working towards in the future, right?
Yeah, although it's all. I see it as a case of proportionality, and while the absolute numbers do grow, the larger your business gets. I would argue that as a small business, you're subject to the same or possibly even worse proportionality than a large business. And what I mean by that is, if your revenues are $500,000 a year, what we see when we look at kind of carbon emissions per dollar of revenue, they vary more from sector to sector than they do from small company to large company. So your carbon emissions may be, 0.5%. If you applied a price to them, might be 0.5% to 1% of your revenues. And the same could be said of a multi-billion-dollar company. So does the total amount of pain increase as the revenues grow? Absolutely. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it proportionally grows. And I think that's a really important point for folks to recognize, is that, just because you're generating $200 billion a year and putting a $15 per ton carbon price on your operation would lead to literally tens of millions of dollars of, quote unquote, social cost of carbon, doesn't mean that you should be off the hook, right? Everybody has a responsibility.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. I like the way of framing it that way. And part of my perspective is that we are carbon neutral through a group called We Are Neutral, because at the time when I reached out to Climate Neutral, y'all were backed up for a while. So we just didn't want to wait. So we got it through We Are Neutral. Great small nonprofit. But anyway, through that process, I know like the amount that we ended up having to invest at the end of the day was pretty small, because we're a small service-based business. So we don't have huge emissions to look at in the first place compared to like a company that's got shipping and logistics and a bunch of other things to deal with. So from my perspective, I was like, oh, it's a small amount. I'd be happy to pay more. And we do, through 1% for the planet or B Corp or other things that we're involved in as well. But that's a really excellent point, that it's more sector to sector rather than scale of business. So thanks for noting that. So I know that the world is facing tons of different problems right now. Like obviously there's social justice, there's health and wellness, there's, healthcare, problems, there's climate change, of course, is one of them. There's so many things that we're facing, wars, etc. Why is it that we should all be hyper focusing on climate neutral or climate in general right now? Like, what are you hearing from people out there in terms of like why they're passionate about solving this one problem?
It's all those other challenges that you just outlined have been challenges of civilization and humanity for as long as there have been humans roaming the globe. And this is the first time in that entire time that we've faced a climate crisis, the likes of which we have right now. So one argument is that we've never seen anything like this to the extent that we're seeing it. I kind of, I'm sort of a amateur fan of nautical history, and I kind of think of it sometimes as you're trying to get a old clipper ship across the ocean, and you're headed toward a massive storm that could absolutely sink the ship. And at the same time, you've got people mutinying on board. You've got fights breaking out. You're running out of food. You've got a leak in the boat. And which of those problems should you deal with? Right? You've got to steer away from the storm while you've got to plug the boat, while you've got to deal with the fact that you're running out of food, while you've got to settle the fights on board. And are they all problems? Yeah, they are. They're all problems. And as the kind of as a captain or leader of the ship, you've got to recognize that it's a complex job. And I sort of think that humans are busy and distracted, and existing is hard. And when you pile too many problems on at once, it's easy to just decide that you really need to focus on just one. Unfortunately, climate, as you pointed out at the very top of the conversation, it touches absolutely everything. It touches healthcare, it touches food availability and scarcity, poverty, climate justice. It touches the probably the most scary aspect of climate is when the extreme effects start to be felt in certain regions of the world. It will cause incredible conflict that we are not prepared as a globe to deal with. And there have been folks who've looked at some of the wars in the last couple of decades and made really convincing arguments that they have been tied to the early effects of climate change. And so that is something that is causing folks in the Defense Department and elsewhere to really take a hard look at how climate is changing geopolitics. And it's, I think for all these reasons, we need to focus on it alongside all of the other problems that we're dealing with. The other point, though, I think that's really important that is often left out of the conversation is that the transition away from fossil fuels is incredibly hopeful. It's really positive, and it leads to a world that is really nice to live in. So when you look at the scenarios of kind of a decarbonized future, it's quite possible to have a thriving, healthy economy and human population powered by clean energy, not staring into the teeth of unabated climate change. And yeah, the world looks pretty darn good. You deal with a lot of ancillary pollution issues in that transition. You end up dealing with a lot of fundamental challenges that we have with energy supply. You end up with more domestic energy production as opposed to dependence on foreign sources of energy that are heavily subject, of course, to geopolitics and price fluctuations. So anyway, I could go on and on about that point, but the nature of the clean kind of net zero future is that it actually looks pretty awesome to be a citizen on planet Earth in that scenario. And so it is not just the case that you need to kind of steer away from the storm and assume that there's another storm ahead. It's actually steering away from the storm and ending up in pretty nice sunny waters.
Yeah, I love that. first of all, like the idea that this is unprecedented and therefore something that we should focus on. Because to your point, if we focus on the things that we've been trying to solve for thousands of years and still haven't solved yet, like not to say that we shouldn't keep working on it, but those will always be problems, probably just human nature. So focusing on the thing that is unprecedented and affects all of us right now and in the very near future, we're probably hitting very close to a line that we can't cross and still continue to have a future as a species, right? So I think that's a really good point. And then I also kind of love that you're talking about it as something of a domino effect, right? Like if we don't solve this problem, everything else that we're trying to solve is going to get that much worse, like on the ship. Like if they just decide to sit down and have a talk about the mutiny, well, the ship's going to go into the storm and they're all going to be dead. So if they don't at least turn the ship before they start that talk, then everything's done. So I love those kind of notes too. And then the last note about just kind of the positive look at the future kind of reminds me of sci-fis that are more often than not kind of a dystopian future of like showing kind of lessons learned on teaching us what the world's going to look like if we don't, solve some of these problems. But the picture you can imagine with, this clean energy, with better health systems, with food systems that can, easily feed everyone around the world, et cetera. And like the prosperity, peace, and happiness we could be living in if we get some of these core problems solved. That's so amazing. I wish more sci-fis would would kind of paint that picture, right? Of like, this is what it could be like. I guess it's just not as good of a storytelling tool if there's not conflict, but painting that picture is kind of nice for people. So I'm going to hold that in my head too as I continue to think about all the work we do, rather than just focus on the problems we're trying to solve. Let's think about the world we're trying to build too. That's a nice way to look at it. So I know the Change Climate Project does a lot more than just this certification, right? So can you talk about what else you do, like some of the programs you have to support businesses?
Yeah, I'll take us back again through sort of a quick historical tour, and that was, this initial inspiration that we needed to fill a gap in the market for carbon and climate climate initiatives at the corporate level, not being recognized at the time by any sort of indication, eco-label or otherwise. And then, we kind of came up with that idea and started talking to companies. And the first question we got was, okay, cool, how do we do this? And so we found ourselves very quickly being faced with the challenge of how do we get companies through a certification process in the time frame that we wanted them to, which was urgent, and really wanting to stand up our coalition within the first 9 months, and also to be able to start to create a movement very, very quickly. So we ended up building some tools, primarily in software for the first go around, a really primitive software tool at the time, and that's evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. And over those years, in addition to this software, we have built a ton of content that we really try to make as easy to digest as possible. We've created workshop formats to help people through the process of carbon measurement and reduction planning. We've created a volunteer core of carbon measurement coaches, so companies have access to expert coaching through the process without really having to pay for it. We see that as a huge enabler. It really streamlines the process and creates better results from carbon measurement. And then a community of people who are learning from each other all the time. So folks who are encountering similar challenges in their sustainability journeys can talk to each other and ask questions and see what successes have been had and learn from those successes, and also learn from the challenges that people are running into. So there's a whole set of, I would say, kind of content, workshops, experiences, interacting with peers and colleagues. All that is part of the broader set of programs that we offer. Increasingly, we're offering all of that not just to certified companies or certifying companies, but to other companies who are considering launching climate initiatives or are midway through deploying climate initiatives and are looking for a little bit more support. People who are looking to build the business case within their companies, which requires them to be able to talk to the details. So there's a larger and larger community of folks that we're serving with these tools and resources.
That's amazing because, yeah, you can't just put the pressure on people to get the work done and then go figure it out themselves. I mean, you can, but like it's better if we all figure it out together and have some support along the way. So working together more as a community rather than as individuals, I think we'll get there further, faster together. So that's part of why we do this podcast, for example, is we want people to learn from each other so we can all kind of pull those insights instead of having to learn all those hard lessons ourselves. Let's learn from someone else who's been there a little bit further ahead on the road, and then we can pull those lessons in and make more progress. So I love that. Out of curiosity, what would you say are the highlights so far for you? Like, what are you most proud of accomplishing?
We have pretty quickly built a really wonderful community of brands, kind of leading consumer brands that have a lot invested in their own presence to the market through their marketing, social media, and otherwise. And what that's allowed us to do is to get the message out to a lot more people a lot faster. I think that kind of mechanism of working with companies that are both very aware and deliberate about their market presence has allowed us, again, to kind of, we really have hijacked, the marketing agenda with this climate message. And it's allowed us to turn companies into allies in the communications battle to kind of explain to people that carbon emissions are tied to everything that you do, but there's something that you can do about them. So I think that alone has been probably the biggest source of success and impact for us. We measure our impact primarily in terms of number of companies and number of tons of carbon. But we have all sorts of other impact metrics that we track as well, from individuals that we think we've reached with the message, both through our channels and through the channels of the companies that we work with, number of companies that we've gotten through the measurement process, and so forth and so on. So I'll say kind of building the community of companies is sort of number one. Secondly, we have uncovered an unbelievable, trend of people who are out there who are looking to transition into climate work or are doing work already and looking to do more. And that has taken the shape of an amazing volunteer community. So people who give us an hour or two, sometimes 10, 20 hours as volunteer carbon measurement coaches, software engineers, researchers, market analyzers, all sorts of things. We've had all of our legal work donated pro bono by a law firm. It's been wonderful to work with. So bottom line, it's been really incredible to kind of tap into this community of folks out there who are just looking to help out. We have volunteer calls every month, and every month I come away from those calls like, wow, there's some just unbelievable people who are looking to put their own foot forward on becoming a part of the solutions and a part of the progress, which to me feels just really great.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's a proof that you're striking a chord and doing great work if people are flooding to you to help support that work, right? So that's amazing. And then you also talked about kind of measuring based on some of your impact based on the number of companies and tons of carbon. So speaking of which, how many companies are currently certified now, and where can listeners go to find more information about them and support them?
The companies that will achieve certification this year are probably about 350, 360. And we are in the process of updating our website with all the ones who finished within the last couple weeks. The website changeclimate.org is where you can access the certified brand directory and search for sectors and types of companies, or just search by name. The information that we provide, we call it brand profile pages, and the brand profile pages outline what companies have done to achieve the certification. So it's always been really important for us that individuals feel like they know what a company has done to achieve the certification. Whether an individual believes in that work or thinks it's important or not, we can't control that. But what we can control is the information that gets displayed on those pages. And we want it to be as thorough and detailed as we can get reasonably within the certification process. So I'd encourage folks to check out their favorite brand and see what they're up to. I think you probably would find on average that companies are doing a lot more than you know about. Right. The technical detail on brand profile pages is, we like to think, the best example out there of kind of systematic disclosure of the work that goes into climate initiatives. Now, there are certainly, massive companies out there who do a lot more reporting within their sustainability reports and have the resources to put together 30, 40, 50 pages of analysis on the work that they're doing. But most companies are not in that position. So with the brand profile pages, you get a lot of information that sheds a light on these initiatives.
That's great. That's a good resource, because obviously, transparency is huge, and helping people who are curious to learn more have access to that information instead of digging through reports on various websites, I think is a really powerful tool to moving everyone forward in our knowledge of climate and the solutions that are out there. So that's all wonderful. And of course, another way people can find and support these brands is by looking for the climate neutral certification mark on products or websites of companies that they're looking at. So that's part of the reason with this impact driven gift guide, we made sure we put the certification logos next to the products so people can start to recognize these logos, and a little more information about each certification in the back of the guide, as well as links to websites so that they can go to the directory. So that's hopefully one way people will find their path into, is just start seeing that mark out there in the world, get curious, and go and learn more. So thanks for doing what you're doing. Now let's shift into a little more personal fun session, kind of tied to the theme of this release time of this year's impact driven gift guide. Holidays are coming up, so I figured I would pepper you with some holiday related questions. First off, what's your favorite type of gift to receive?
Yeah, I love gifts that have been things that I've identified as needing, but don't really have the desire to purchase for myself. That way they're kind of not extraneous. Nothing worse than, when you're a kid and your aunt gives you, the ugliest, jacket or sweatshirt that she could find or whatever. And you're like, oh, thanks. Now I have this thing I've got to throw away. So anyway, love it when that happens and somebody knows that you just want that perfect pair of scissors or whatever. I also love it when my kids pick out clothes for me, because I feel like they're much better
Really?
fashion consultants than I would ever be for myself.
That's so funny, because I feel like the opposite is normally true. Like you were just saying with the aunt, or the parents pick up a shirt for you, or grandparents, and then you're like, am I ever going to wear this? I don't know. But on the flip side, when the kids pick out the clothes, I guess, it's a positive. So that's fun.
I think unlike your aunt or your parents, your kids have a real vested interest in how you look.
So you don't embarrass them.
Yeah, because they walk around with you, right? I mean, and you kind of, whether you look like a nerd or not, is sort of has a huge bearing on how they're seen by their friends. So you don't have that with your aunt.
That's amazing. I love it. Okay, so what is your favorite holiday of the year?
I'm a huge fan of Thanksgiving, sort of on the cusp of fall, heading into winter. I guess it's in the cusp of winter, technically. Just the ability to get together and cook some good food and enjoy some quiet time with family, but without the craziness of Christmas.
Nice. Yeah, that's a pretty common answer. I think there's something about the changing seasons and shifting of the pace of life and so on and so forth during this time that people love. Plus, just a lot of family gathering and stuff. So where do you like to go to shop for gifts?
Any climate neutral certified brand's webpage, of
Nice.
course.
Nailed it. I love that. And of course, we could add to that the impact driven gift guide, which has a lot of those brands as well. So if this one's maybe the hard one, if you could only give one gift to everyone on your list, what would it be?
Yeah, I'm going to go a little off the reservation on this one, which is, I think a charismatic charitable donation would be my choice. And when you say everyone, I'm trying to think what's, one thing that fits, could get my parents excited, as well as my kids excited, as well as other people excited. So, what I mean by that is I gave $100 to this animal conservation trust, and in exchange for that $100, they're taking care of an elephant in sub-Saharan Africa. Or I gave $40 and we purchased a goat that's going into this community in Bolivia or something like that. So anyway, those kinds of gifts I think are wonderful. They've got a story behind them. Sometimes you even get a little stuffed animal with them. And but I think everybody that I've ever seen receive one of those really feels connected to the purpose, regardless of their age.
That's brilliant too. And also just a good note for charities out there, right? Because I think, people want to do the right thing and want to support others, but so often, like we mentioned earlier in the show, we're all dealing with so many issues of our own. So sometimes it's hard to put the priority into helping someone you're never going to meet all the way across the world, or protecting this one animal that you're never going to see. But those stuffies or the pictures of the animal you're supporting, or the live webcam, or, whatever like that, it makes it more real. It makes it more tangible. So, again, everyone wants to do the right thing, but finding some ways to make it a little bit more personal to their life, I think is helpful. I also say the same thing for brands trying to communicate their impact. If you're just a brand and say, I saved this many tons of whatever, of this amorphous thing like carbon, a lot of consumers out there are going to be like, well, what does that mean? But if you translate that to them as we basically removed 3,000 cars from the road last year or something like that, that's makes it a little bit more digestible. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good note for charities and just communicating impact in general, is how do we make it mean something to people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Carbon emissions is an incredibly hard one to translate. A while back, I told myself I'd commit to memory how big a ton of carbon is in terms of space.
Yeah.
And I forgot. So I need to refresh myself.
Yeah, because it's probably a hard concept to visualize. I get caught in this all the time when people are like, oh, I've got 3 acres. And I'm like, what is an acre again? I know I've looked it up 10 times, but I could just never remember what an actual
square
acre is.
feet. But what does that really mean? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what does air weigh is basically the same question, right? How much does air weigh? People say nothing. Well, not the reality is you've got to have a lot of air to weigh a ton, and that's basically carbon dioxide. You've got to have a lot of it to weigh a ton, and of course it gets smaller the greater the pressure. But if I remember correctly, something like a large football stadium's worth of gas at sea level is about equivalent to a ton.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's helpful. Maybe I'll remember that, or maybe I'll look it up again. But yeah, I like any way you can make it easier for people to understand, like a football stadium or something. So good note there. Okay. So the final question, since this is the impact-driven gift guide after all, how would you define, or how would you define impact-driven, or what does impact-driven mean to you?
The primary answer I would give here is impact driven is describes an organization whose number one operating metric is the social or environmental outcome that they are trying to achieve. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case in all impact-driven work. In other words, it can be a number 2 or number 3 metric, but certainly impact-driven would refer to an organization that is trying to achieve some sort of positive outcome, for the world that has nothing to do with its own commercial gain.
Nice. I like that. And sometimes it is tied to commercial gain too, which is what I love about working with companies that are solving real problems out in the world as their core business model, because that means, everything they're doing in the business, if the business is designed to solve problems, is part of their impact, right? So I think there's some companies who do business as usual and then use a percentage of their proceeds or something like that to give back or try to streamline their operations to, be more neutral or whatever. But then there's a lot of businesses, and many of the ones that we work with at Modern Species, they were established specifically around a cause, and every chocolate bar they sell or every bag of beans or something like that is directly impacting their mission. So I love that too. So, there's many ways to go about it, like you said, but I love that when you're a purpose-driven business or, whatever, you get to have the profit and the impact at the same time because, the profit is tied to your impact. Cool. Well, thanks again for carving out some time to share a little bit more about the story of the Change Climate Project and the climate neutral certification. Hopefully this is enlightening some people and encouraging them to go get climate neutral certified themselves, or at least go support some of the brands and companies that are climate neutral certified. So thanks for kind of moving this project forward and doing important work, and for participating in this whole project where we can spread a little more consciousness into consumerism around gifting. So I appreciate everything you do, and thanks again for your time.
Amazing. Thanks for the conversation. It was super fun.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about the climate neutral certification, the Change Climate Project, or Austin, go to changeclimate.org. To get your copy of the gift guide, go to modernspecies.com/gift guide. If you like this show, remember to help us grow by liking, reviewing, and sharing. If you're new here, don't forget we have over 100 episodes in the archive. Some might be called Evolve CPG, but it's the same show, so dig in for more goodness. If you consider yourself an impact-driven professional, join me over at impactdriven.community, where we're supporting each other's growth as impact leaders.